Thank you. The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. Now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. The true mind of the Tathagata is none other than our own mind. We assume that mind just means thinking, but that's only one small part of mind. It's a tool, but it certainly is not all that mind is capable of. And today I'd like to, on this first day of the October 2023 7-day session here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico, speak some about the Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra, the heart of perfect wisdom. Prajna means transcendental wisdom. It's not book learning. It's an intuitive sense of things, a deep, clear, accurate intuitive sense. And in order to reach that deep, clear, accurate, intuitive sense, we have to let go a lot of assumptions, a lot of conditioning, a lot of ideas about what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're doing. I spoke in the opening talk about conditioning and how it happens right from the very beginning of birth. And in fact, it can, I think, actually happen before that. I know someone who remembers actually being born, and I know someone who remembers, who was very cognitive, very aware, let's put it that way, not cognitive necessarily, but very aware of what was going on before they were born. So we kind of assume that what science says is that we're able to learn to think, we're able to be able to think when we're about 1.5 years old. Prior to that, however, we function quite well. We're able to eat, sleep, poop and pee, all of those things, and smile and laugh and walk and sit up, assuming we're healthy little kids. And yet we don't need to be able to think yet. Thinking comes later, and thinking comes with a difference in perception too. When a child is born, they're in what we call oneness. They're so present that they don't have a sense of distinction in terms of me and mom, or me and what I'm eating, or me and the puppy dog, or me and anything else. Along about 7 months or so, in my experience, babies begin to, it's called get strange. And that is, they begin to become aware that there are differences. And they're somewhat disconcerted about this. But gradually, especially if they are treated well, they are able to integrate that and become healthy human beings. All along the way, we learn a lot about life, about how to behave in this culture that we were born into, about who is someone we can trust and who is someone we cannot trust. And a lot of conditioning takes place in those early months, actually, that forms a framework through which we view the world. We cannot always trust our perceptions as a result, because if we have a series of experiences where we're not being treated very well, then we learn that we can't really trust the environment. We can't really trust other people. It can really impact the quality of life from then on. If we have been treated well, if we have had a sense through experience that when we're in trouble or when we're uncomfortable and we let others know about it, that there will be a response that will help. A nurturing, a changing of the diaper, so on and so forth. And again, as a result of that, we learn something about the world we perceive, and perceive is the important part in this. And so through our Zazen, we begin to see where we are, I guess I would say, caught in assumptions, in conditioning that may not be accurate. And I can give you an example out of my own life. For many, 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 many years, based on how it was around me when I grew up, I had a sense that other people were not positive about me, and in fact, perhaps even more than that. And one night, one Sunday evening, when I was living in Rochester, I went to a market to buy a few things, and I was going through the checkout line, and the checkout person was in a filthy mind state. Just really, I don't know what had happened to her that day, but she was chewing nails. And for the first time ever in my whole life, I recognized that it was not about me. It was immensely liberating. And that gives you a sense of how strong and deep conditioning can be. In order to really go deep in our practice, we have to allow ourselves to open to these experiences if they come up, when they come up. And that offers us a chance to see what's beyond. Another opportunity in that direction is as we are falling asleep at night or just waking up in the morning, there is a time when that conditioning is not manifest. We are just simply in a mind space of total presence with no agenda, with no belief system in place yet until we come to full consciousness. And it is a doorway into a deeper place in mind. So keep that in mind. As you begin to drift off to sleep, relaxing into it, you will find yourself, if you pay attention, in a place of relaxed presence in which your attachments have drifted away and are not as prominent. And you can take advantage of that by exploring within that space. And I'm not talking about exploring with words. I'm talking about exploring with that sense of curiosity, that sense of openness to possibility. And it can be actually enlightening. Speaking of enlightenment, there are many, many grades of enlightenment. We used to think back 50 years ago that you had a Kensho experience and that was sufficient for the rest of your life. You were going to be floating along in bliss and happiness. Nothing difficult was going to come into your life, and so on and so forth. That's really a fake dream. What enlightenment does is offer us a window on reality. And it depends on how deeply we go into that awakening experience, how clear that window is. And that allows us to become a little bit more free of our conditioning. And it's much more than that. When I talk about conditioning as if it's a major thing, it is a major thing, but It's not who we are. And this is important to recognize. Who we are is so much deeper, so much more free, and has so great a capacity for being totally in the present moment. And in our Zazen, we are working towards manifesting that. So I'd like to share with you the Prajna Paramita Sutra, as I said. This is the short form. This is the heart of the Prajna Paramita Sutra. Sutras are the purported teachings of the Buddha. And right there, we need a definition. There was a man in India who was born much more than 2,500 years ago. At this point, sooner or later, it's going to get to 3,000 years ago. And he had a lot of questions about life, curiosity about life. His father was high-ranking, perhaps a village chief. They call him a king. I don't know if that was accurate, but that's one way to put it. Somebody very important at the top of the totem pole in terms of prestige and power in an environment. And when this baby was born, the father, according to tradition, brought in astrologers to take a look at what he would do with his life. And they were split on the question. Some said he would become a great world leader, and others said he would become a deeply spiritual sage. And then one astrologer arrived late, broke the tie, and said he'll become a highly renowned sage. So his father was kind of worried, as fathers are. They want their kids to grow up and be sort of like they are, and do what they do. And sometimes the kids do not have that same inclination, and that's a whole other topic. So his father made sure that he didn't experience anything in his life that would be painful. If you can take a look at what the Jataka tales report, and the Jataka tales are the memories of this man as he was coming to his profound awakening. There are memories of past lives during which he was working very hard on letting go of attachments, of becoming free to be in the moment and perceive clearly. And so when this final life came, he was able to go all the way down to the bottom. A very profound awakening experience. And from then on, he taught how other people could reach that same awakening. Buddha means simply awake. The Buddha is not a god, not an avatar. The Buddha was a human being, just like the rest of us. And he had this great curiosity that was piqued because he was enclosed in a compound, a large compound to be sure, but he began to get curious about what was outside the walls. And one night he snuck out with, they say, his charioteer, at any rate with the person that was his driver, let's put it that way. And the first night he saw someone who was old. He'd never seen somebody who was old before. Of course, back then, people didn't live really long enough to look old. They died in their 30s or 40s. And so somehow this man had gone beyond that. So he's losing his hair. He's all wrinkled. He's creeping around because he doesn't have a lot of bodily strength anymore. And it was a shock to Siddhartha. And he said, "But what's that?" Like my grandson said when I was reading the book about the Buddha's life. And I was telling him about what are known as the four sights. The first one being the sight of an old man. "What's that?" said Duncan. And that's what Siddhartha said apparently too. And his driver said, "That's somebody who's old. If you live that long, you're going to look like that too." And that was a big shock. So he went out the next night and saw someone who was sick. I remember being in Hong Kong, going around the corner in that very, very populated city, and there in the middle of the street, it wasn't a lane, it was a proper city street. There was an old woman who was just throwing up in the street. And you can see a lot of that kind of thing in India these days. So he was shocked at that too. There are some people who make it through life without being sick, and apparently he was one of them. And again, what's that? That's someone who's sick, someone who's ill. And that will happen to you too if you eat the wrong food or have other kinds of encounters with illness. And again, he was shocked. He went out a third night. This time, he saw a corpse, which again is quite common in India. When I was there in 1996 at a conference of Western Buddhist ordained women in Bodh Gaya, which is where the Buddha is said to have had his deep awakening experience under the Bo tree, it was quite an interesting experience. We had difficulty getting there because sometimes things don't run according to plans in many countries in the world. And we had thought we had arranged through fax to get a particular train, overnight train, to Gaya, which is the closest town that the train went to. And it turns out we arrive in India. No one met us. We were surprised because we thought we had it all arranged. And finally we were told a couple of things. One was we were not able to stay in the Tibetan temple because a group of monks had come through and we would not be able to stay there. And then we were housed in a guest house, which was a little bit of a surprise because it cost us some money. And then it turns out that no reservations had been made for the train. And as soon as they could make a reservation was 3 days from then. So they made the reservation, and we arrived at the train station quite early because sometimes things don't go as planned, and waited and waited and waited. Originally, the train that was scheduled was listed on the board, and then it disappeared. So we find out that actually it's not going to come as scheduled. It's going to be coming later that day. And so we went back to the guest house and came back still a couple hours early. It was reported on the board that it was going to be arriving on a particular track. We went and waited on that track. It didn't come. And so then we went back and asked again, and it was going to be arriving on a different track at a different hour. And finally, we were able to find out where that train was going to be, get there, and it did arrive. And then there was the challenge of getting onto it because there was a great crush of people, which was a surprise to us. Well, not a surprise, but it was very different from what we had experienced because we'd come from Japan. And in Japan, everything is quite orderly. When people are waiting for a bus, they line up in order of how they got there. But waiting for the train, the same thing. But of course, a train in India, it's a mad crush to get into the car. And then it turns out we had a few extra people on the bunks we were supposed to be on, and had to have some help removing these people. And we did end up going to Gaia overnight, although again we had a little bit of a surprise. We began to realize, first of all, that the train windows were so dirty that you really couldn't see out them very well. And this, again, it was very unlike Japan. And so we also realized that the train was never announced what village or what town or what city the train was moving through. Whereas in Japan, not only do you get an announcement of the upcoming stops, you actually get a precise announcement telling you exactly which side of the train you're going to get off of. So we finally asked one of the other passengers, and we're in our robes, and the man agreed to let us know when Gaia was arriving. And we went out to the back of the train in case we would have to hop off, because that's what it seemed like happened in some places. And as he's coming out with us to the back of the train, he says, "Are you Buddhist?" And we said, "Yes." And he said, "My name is Siddhartha." So at that point, we hopped off and got a motorcycle taxi and went on our way to Bodh Gaya. And when we arrived, we discovered that two Westerners had been murdered the night before in Bodh Gaya, which is a very small town. And then I got a fax from my brother saying that our dad was getting remote and not responding to things. He was, by that time, my age actually, and had Parkinson's for quite a long time, and by that time was quite frozen up by it and having great difficulty even breathing. He was not eating anymore because he couldn't even swallow his food without choking on it. So we knew, or I knew, that the end was coming. And so there was that to be reckoned with. And then it turns out that the conference didn't start on time because nobody got there on time. And as soon as we started, we learned that a French nun had a terrible accident in Delhi and was in a hospital, not expected to live. So there were several other women who actually knew her personally, so they took turns going back to Delhi to take care of her in the hospital. And then she died. And so we went through the conference. It was almost a month long, and both of us got amoebic hepatitis, which was also an adventure. And then it was time to leave. We managed to hire a taxi, reserve a taxi, early enough that we actually got one, because apparently somebody's daughter was getting married in the village, and the man had reserved every single taxi except the one that we had reserved for the wedding. So we got in this taxi. The night before, there was a terrible storm, and the courtyard of where we were staying, the Burmese Vihara, was full, about 2 feet full of broken branches and leaves and debris that had come down in this high wind. We got in the taxi, headed to Gaia, and passed a corpse in the street. And also then, when we got to Delhi, after taking the train back from Gaia, I got a fax from my brother saying my father had died. So the whole experience in India was one of death and dying. And that was somewhat more extreme than many people experience, at least not in Western countries, where death is hidden away because people are afraid of it. So the Buddha, the man who's named the Buddha or called the Buddha, his name was Siddhartha Gautama. And he was an ordinary human being who had the same questions and the same concerns and the same yearning that we each have that brings us to the Zendo. The Prajna Paramita, which is the core, it's considered the deepest teaching that he gave, begins the Bodhisattva of compassion. Now, if you look at the altar, there is a figure of what is known in Chinese as Guanyin, or in Japanese as Kannon. In India, it was Avalokiteshvara, and represents the compassion, the deep, profound compassion. This is not pity. This is not feeling sorry for somebody. This is deep compassion that is innate in every human being. So this is a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is someone who has taken a vow to continue to deepen their practice and to become more and more and more free of attachments, meaning ideas about who they are, attachments to how they think they have to be, and attachments to how they would react to someone who threatens that self-image. A source of pain, really, these attachments. And has chosen to not to pass on into Buddhahood, complete awakening, until all beings are liberated. Now, all beings is a dual situation. Sentient beings, which we speak of, are the thoughts, the ideas, the conditioning in our own minds. And we have a lot of them. And they're so subtle and so ubiquitous that we're not even aware of them. And our practice is about gradually becoming aware of where we're caught and taking advantage of that opportunity to work with letting those caught places go. And there's some very important ways that are extremely effective to do this. It's not by wanting to letting them go. We can want them to let go forever, and we won't make an inch progress in that direction. But if we tune into our body, and some of you have heard about the felt sense, that is a sense of energy that if you tune into your body, there's a sense of energy pretty constant in that body, and it'll vary depending on what we experience, what we think, what we encounter. And the important ways to become free of it, if it's difficult, are to just simply tune into that energy. Rather than going upstairs, I call it, into our ideas, getting angry, getting anxious, getting irritated, or whatever, as a result of trying to escape that energy in our body. It's an incredibly effective tool and has been relatively recently, within the last 30 years, discovered by mainstream psychotherapy in the United States. It was actually taught centuries ago by the Tibetan master Longchenpa, and exactly how to use it to let go of difficult feelings. It is something that takes time to master, because difficult feelings by their nature are not ones that we want to feel, and yet that's required if we are to become free of them. And I'm not talking about becoming aware of how we see them, in a sense, but becoming aware of their energy in our body. Before, as the Tibetans say, karma has been created. In other words, before you've reacted to it, you can release that attachment extremely effectively. So, the Bodhisattva of compassion, from the depths of Prajna wisdom, from that transcendent wisdom, saw the emptiness of all 5 skandhas. By the way, when I was working on my first koan, which was officially Mu, I actually was not so interested in Mu. What really fascinated me was this heart of perfect wisdom. Realize that all 5 skandhas are empty. In other words, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what we're tasting, they are neutral until we put a meaning on them. And it is putting the meaning on them that makes them painful, frightening, or whatever. Of course, there are situations where it's darn right to be frightened. When your life is in danger, it would be stupid just to stand there and not to try to escape. But this is a little bit different, because at the same time that these skandhas is what they talk about, are empty, still we do perceive our environment. We understand our environment to be a certain way. We know that we're sitting in the zendo on these tons. We know that we will be going into the exercise period next, and hopefully we're not just jumping into that, but listening to this teisho. And we live as human beings. We're not living as disembodied souls. And by the way, there is no concept of soul in Buddhism. Eternal life, yes, but souls, no. So the Bodhisattva of compassion, from the depths of transcendental wisdom, saw the emptiness of all 5 skandhas and sundered the bonds that create suffering. When you can see at a deep level through this self-image of being a particular person with particular needs, particular desires, particular habit patterns, maybe phobias or whatever, when you see through that as an image, it's a self-image born of conditioning, then you are free not to be caught in the need to act out of that conditioning, act out of that self-image. You're free to simply be in the moment and respond to the moment as it is most appropriately responded to. And we can do that when we've seen through that self-image. The self-image demands that we react. Somebody insults us, we get angry and want to punch them or something. But when we realize that that self-image is just a fiction, then we are free to respond. And when we are free to respond, we see so many different options. It's as if when we're still caught, we see a hallway with one door at the end, and we need to open that door, and we need to get out that door. But if that door is locked, padlocked, and there's no way to open it, and we are caught in our conditioning, we're going to get pretty upset. Whereas if we have seen through that conditioning and see that that door is locked and impossible to go through, in other words, a job offer falls through, something like that, then suddenly we're able to see a whole lot of other doors that are opening with even more helpful and positive options. But as long as we're attached to one result, we're going to get stuck in suffering. And that's important to recognize. So the emptiness of all five skandhas, and then it goes on to say form is empty, emptiness, and emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. Where is the Prajna Paramita?
On page 5.
Okay. Can you find me page 5, please? Thank you.
Oh, wait, that's the Japanese one.
Okay, thanks. The Bodhisattva of compassion from the depths of prajna wisdom saw the emptiness of all five skandhas and sundered the bonds that create suffering. Know then, form here is only emptiness, emptiness only form. And that was my big koan. How can form be empty? How can emptiness be form? What it says on the scroll up there behind the altar is, out of not one thing arise the 10,000 things. That is the same as form is emptiness and emptiness is form. But to recognize this in a deep level within yourself is immensely freeing. And I would suggest that each of you, if you're inclined in that direction, go into this chant. It's online, and puzzle over it, as I did, and gradually you will begin to understand what that means, and as a result you will become a little bit more free, and that is most beneficial for your life, for your ease, and for your happiness, allowing you to not be caught by circumstances the way most of us are, and find yourself with a little bit more liberation. And then you continue to deepen that awareness and get more aware, get more enlightened, get more free. In the Buddhist teachings, in terms of perception, it speaks of, for example, you see a bird. So the energy of this bird goes into your eye and then is translated into your brain. As it goes into your eye, it's totally neutral. When it gets translated into your brain, then the question starts. Oh, it's a magpie. Oh, no, it's a raven, or whatever. And then in concert with that comes up, magpies have such awful squawks. Or you start attaching ideas to it. But we can say that, and the reality is, until you realize the experience of that, it means nothing. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is no other than emptiness, emptiness no other than form. And it goes on from there, but we're already almost towards the end of the hour, so I won't continue today. I may continue tomorrow. I just urge you to take a look at these, and of course it's in the chant book here, and puzzle over it. these are supposed to be deep teachings. And as you begin to understand them more and more clearly, you will recognize that they are deep teachings. And they will liberate you from the stilted views that we all have and free us into a more wide way of experiencing, a more free way of experiencing. And then, as part of that, when we have, when we're in a situation, for example, where somebody gets very angry at us, and ordinarily what we would do, we would sort of shrink into ourselves, or else we would get defensive. And instead, what happens is that we understand the other person's, where the other person is coming from, their pain that is driving that anger, their misunderstandings that is driving that anger. And I have a really wonderful example of this. Harada Mitra-roshi, when he was still a monk at Shofukuji, but he was a senior monk, and he was out leading a work party outside the inner gates of the temple. Temples in Japan have an inner enclosed area, which is the practice area, and then they have a generally more expansive property outside of that is still temple grounds. So they were out there doing something with shovels and so on. And it turns out that on that land was a group of homeless people who were convinced that the temple was robbing them of water, which is an interesting concept in Japan, where everything seems to be water. It rains a lot during the rainy season. There are rivers and rivers and rivers all over. It's damp as all get out. And you may find that if you stay there for a while, you find mold growing on your suitcase. It's quite a wet place. But at any rate, these people were sure that the temple was cheating them out of water. So when the work party was out there, the man who seemed to be the leader of the group, and the person that told me this, who was there at the time, described him as someone who was not a stranger to violence, came up and was red in the face, yelling at Harada, and like inches away from him, in extremely threatening tones and extremely threatening posture. And Harada Mitra-roshi simply he looked the man in the eye, not in a defensive way, not in an accusing way, but in an honoring way, and simply listened to what he had to say. And as he listened to what this man had to say, understanding that he was upset, understanding that perhaps the reason he was upset was legitimate. I don't know whether that was part of the thing, whether he felt it was legitimate or not. Simply know that he understood the person's pain, empathized with it, was totally present with this man who was enraged, and got inwardly more and more and more quiet. Let go, really, of any need to react, any need to argue with the guy, which only would have escalated the thing and possibly resulted in a brawl. And what happened then was that the man began also to respond to that deepening quiet. And in the end, they seemed to settle things quietly, and the man went away. If Harada had been attached to being insulted or being encountered by a very angry man and feeling endangered or whatever, it would not have come out like that. The situation was dangerous. In fact, the person that told me about it was holding a shovel, And he said he hung on to his shovel in case he needed to whack the guy if he took a fist to Harada. It became unnecessary. But Mitra-roshi's simply being totally present, honoring the man as a human being with concerns, hearing his concerns without arguing and without needing to argue. That's the most important thing. He didn't need to fight with the guy. He didn't have an agenda where he had to protect himself or defend the temple or anything like that. He was free to honor this human being as a human being in pain and to see what he could do to help relieve that pain. This is the product of deep Zazen. By that time, Mitra-roshi had already had quite a deep Kensho experience, about which he said, I suddenly realized all I had to do is receive with open hands whatever came towards me. Simply receive it with open hands, without a need to fight, without a need to defend, without a need to do anything but remain present. And of course, if it had been a truly dangerous situation, he would have responded in a different way, but not in a fighting way necessarily. It's very difficult to explain this kind of mind state, but it is so free, and it influences other people. And this is the thing about sentient beings. Yes, the sentient beings are our own thoughts, our own caught places in our mind. But when we let ourselves become free of these caught places, when we deeply understand the nature of reality, then that influences other people, as it did in the case of this irate homeless man. No words were necessary in terms of trying to, quote, rescue the man or save the man or anything else. Simply by our own demeanor, we influence countless beings. And that's the other side of that coin about liberating sentient beings. So we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. We're already over time. I thank you for listening. Oops. Uh-oh. What'd I do, Shannon?
I was looking.
I hit the wrong button.
Oh wait, can I just?
Thanks.